Orbea seem to be in the process of consolidating their mountain bike range. Last year we saw the new Rallon, which had 150mm of travel at the back and 160 up front, and that was their 29er enduro bike. We also saw a new Oith, which is their cross-country bike, and that comes in two options. You get the 100mm at the front, 100mm at the back XC version, and you get a TR one, which has 120mm at the front and the same frame. Previous generations of the Occam trail bike also came in two versions. There was the Occam TR, which was a 29er with 130mm of travel front and back. Then there was the Occam AM, which had 150mm of travel front and back and 27.5-inch wheels. Now, with this consolidation of their range and, Orbea say, the evolution of the trail bike market, they've decided that the new Occam is going to have only 29-inch wheels and 140mm of travel at the back. To do all this, Orbea have given the Occam a completely new frame, and it's available in both carbon and aluminium versions. The most interesting thing, perhaps, about the new Occam is the customization available for this bike through their online shop. We've often seen with Orbea that you can change components here and there. So for example, you could change the forks to a 150mm 36 from the stock 140mm 34 if you want. You can change the shock, tyres, brakes, some bits of the drivetrain. There's plenty of options there. On top of being able to change the spec, the whole Occam range comes under Orbea's Mayo program, and this is something you'll see on a number of their other performance-orientated bikes. This gives you a range of colour options for the frame which you can specify when you buy it. And it's not just one colour per frame. On the Occam there's two main colours. You can also change the colour of the logos, of the different names and all sorts of things. Surprisingly, this won't cost you any extra, unlike some of the other custom paint options from other companies. And that's because Orbea effectively build the bikes to order and paint them in their own facilities in the Basque Country. It might take a couple of weeks longer to get the custom paint job over the stock ones, but it will be unique. And I reckon that makes this the most customisable, off-the-shelf mountain bike on the market today. Over the past couple of years, we've seen a number of new bikes come with asymmetric frame designs where there's like a spar that joins, say, the down tube and the top tube, or the top tube and the seat tube, and Orbea have done this as well. And this one joins the down tube to the seat tube. The reason for doing this is partly to do with their suspension kinematics and their geometry. So they wanted the upper rocker linkage to be located in a place that gives them the kinematics they want. But this would have meant that they had to put a really bent seat tube in. This would be fine in theory, but the taller the seat tube, the slacker then the effective seat angle of the bike. So to achieve the kinematic they wanted with the seat angle they wanted, they put this spar in between the down tube and the seat tube, partly to give them that location for the main pivot for the locker, and also to add a little bit of stiffness in there. Now they say that this only gives it an extra 100 grams on the frame weight, but gives them all the things that they want. It also allows still for you to put a bottle cage in the bike, but the bottle mounts are located 10mm towards the left of the frame, sort of slightly offset. And they also say that putting a spar like this as opposed to from the top tube to the seat tube means easier and better access to the adjustments on your shock. In terms of geometry, Orbea are pretty much up to date with the Occam. They say that their frame length is about a size bigger than they used to be for a given size, and the seat tubes are a size smaller. This means that a size large has a 474mm reach, along with a 457mm seat tube, so that's quite a long reach and quite a short seat tube. You also get a 66-degree head angle with a 140mm fork and a 77-degree seat angle. Now, within this customization of the bike, they allow you to fit a 150mm fork, and this slackens the angles by half a degree. Rounding it out, you get 440mm chainstays across the range, and you get a 336mm bottom bracket height. In terms of suspension, Orbea have opted for a relatively regular 4-bar suspension design, which they call concentric boost. This means that the most rearward pivot, the one that would be on the chainstay, is actually located around the rear wheel's axle. And the axle that holds the wheel in place actually holds the whole rear triangle together. This, in theory, Orbea say, makes maintenance a little bit easier because it's easier to get to those bearings. Given that Orbea say that the customer profile for the Occam trail bike is now being narrowed because they have the longer travel, more aggressive Rayon, and they have the Oith as well, which comes in two different options, this means they've been able to better tune the suspension to a more targeted audience for the Occam. As you'd expect, there's slightly more anti-squat, which gives better pedalling performance, and they've also relocated the rear brake caliper to give reduced anti-rise. This means that the suspension remains more active under braking. Instead of the suspension jacking and stiffening up when you apply the brakes, it should, in theory, remain more able to move through its travel, which means you get better traction and better braking as a result. I rode the Occam M10, which comes in at £4,400. Now, the bike I rode had the upgrade on the fork, so instead of a 140mm 34 fork, I had a 150mm 36. As you'd expect from a bike with geometry such as this, it was incredibly confident inspiring on descents, and I rode this bike around Ainsa where they have one of the EWS stages. There's a lot of rocky technical terrain, both up and down, and I have to say that the Occam, the new Occam, really impressed on these trails. In terms of climbing, it did a really good job. The bike's not too heavy, partly thanks to that carbon frame on the M10 that I was riding, but also thanks to the shape of the bike and the way the suspension works. It didn't bob too much. On some of the longer drags I did use the lockout on the smoother road climbs, but for the most part I left the shock fully open. There was loads of traction on offer, and that's partly thanks to the suspension, which remains relatively active without being too wallowy, but also the recon tower on the back that I ran at reasonably low pressures to make sure I had enough grip. The steeper seat angle puts you in a really comfortable position on the bike, and because the length of the bike has been increased over the old one, it doesn't feel too cramped when sat on the bike despite that steeper seat angle. On flatter terrain, again, that increase in the anti-squat means that the bike remains nice and stable. It's a bike that you can pedal without getting too bogged down in the suspension mid-stroke. On the first day of testing, we did some shuttle runs, and between the first and the second, I made some changes to the way I set up the shock. I removed some of the low-speed compression damping, and then I added another 0.2cc of spacers within the shock. This meant that the shock felt better in its early stroke, but had plenty of ramp up towards the end. As before, I felt I was running a bit too much compression damping to stop the shock from running all the way through its travel on smaller hits than I'd have liked it to. So, adding volume spacers provided that ramp up at the end of its travel, and I was able to run less compression for a better feeling shock. If you are looking for a super capable trail bike that'll be pretty good for all-day rides, but also very good when you're hitting more technical terrain, I would seriously consider getting a look at the Occam. You should be able to demo one from your local bike shops, and if you want to get all creative, don't forget that there's the Mayo program to get a fully customized bike. What kind of colour combination would you go for on your new Occam? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and hit the little bell symbol near this video, because then you'll get notifications of all the new videos on BikeRadar.